Noon. So welcome to History at High Noon. And because it looks like we're having a family reunion, I think we ought to be having sloppy joes and potato salad. It's really good to see all of you, and I thank you all for coming. So that's welcome and have a good time today. So without further ado, Joanne Bestgen, where she is, over, and she's going to present the program, and she has family members here, and it's all good to have you share with her.
Well, I'm not used to talking in front of a bunch of people, so just my family.
It's just around you.
There's a lot of them here, so I guess I can do it. My mother was Justine Bestgen, and this is her side of the family. I'm the oldest grandchild on that side of the family, so I always tell my family that I'm probably the wisest because I'm the oldest. Anyway, this is some of the Bestgen family history. If you don't mind, I'll kind of just read it because I can't memorize very good. There are some things that may be boring to a lot of people, like looking at photos of someone's grandkids, or heaven forbid, their great-grandkids. Today we may find something even more outlandish, someone's grandparents, or again, heaven forbid, their great or great-great, or even worse yet, their great-great-great-grandparents. But without these people in one's family history, none of us would be who we are today. As in most families, there are little stories and bits of history that make that ancestor seem a bit more real to us. Some of us can remember these little parts of their lives, and sometimes we only know about them through stories told to us or written down by those who have gone before us. We are very lucky in our family that some of our members did write down a lot of their experiences in life through journals, letters to their family members, or diaries. If you would bear with me, some of us would like to share a bit of the Bestgen family history and memories. I would like to start with our grandmother, Jessie Bestgen's side of the family. Her given name was Justine, a name that came down through the generations and still has been used either as a first or middle name in some of our families. Our great-great-grandparents on Grandma's side were named William and Margaret Wilmson Tomat, and Tomat means tired in German. So now sometimes when we're tired, we just say we're Tomat. They had 10 children. The oldest one, Albert, born in 1838, was our great-great-grandfather, who was the first in his family to come to America. Albert had skills to keep a journal, and we have a copy of it called My Trip to America in 1863. Even in 1863, the voyage was not very easy for those who chose to come. He starts the account with a heavy heart and tears in his eyes, leaving his sorrowful family, friends, and not knowing if he would ever see them again. He took a train from his home in Dornick, a little village of about 350 people, which was about 10 miles from the Holland border, in what was then Prussia and is now West Germany. He switched trains at Oberhausen and traveled all night towards Bremen. There were innkeepers by the hundreds at the depot offering meals and lodging for the immigrants at a fair price. He found a nice fellow who took him in and showed him the wonderful sights of the city. Albert brought supplies he would need for the ship, like a straw sack for bedding, tin eating and drinking utensils, wine, rum, sugar, bread, and a 140-pound chest with his worldly possessions. On April 17th, about 2,000 people were taken by tugboat across the Bremen harbor. They saw immense seagoing vessels. There were several hundred ships in the harbor. He got on the sailboat, and it wasn't strange to him because he had been a soldier, so he was used to packing and unpacking things. When it was time to eat, he took his dishes and went up to the kitchen for dinner and saw the cooks dishing out beans and speck. Speck refers to pork fat with or without some meat in it. He was disgusted and went without eating. He thought he'd ask the captain about a place on the second deck so he could get better food. Well, he soon found out that the food all came out of the same pot. There were 270 passengers on the ship as they left the harbor towards the North Sea. When it came time to sail, they had to wait for the captain as he had just gotten married and was the first time he had his bride with him and the first time she had seen the sea. While waiting to sail, everyone was happy and they danced and played their instruments and sang. On April 22nd, the ship sailed to the open sea. The food was still speck and beans, but they ate it anyway. Then the sea started to have its fun. The trunks and chests were thrown from side to side. Everyone stayed in bed, and everyone was sick. Some tried to get the captain to go back to land, offering double the price of their passage if he would. Even his bride begged him. No, they sailed farther out to sea. This storm lasted 3 days before the winds let up and the passengers were well again. When beans and speck were served again, everyone was hungry and didn't complain about the food. On April 25th, with a good wind, the ship entered the English Channel, and they saw the shores of France and the white cliffs of England. On Sunday, the weather was nice, and everyone got together and had a Sunday service, sermons, psalms, and hymns. The ship scarcely moved, but peace was not to last, as the strong winds came again and the waves as high as a church tower again. Everyone got sick. By May 1st, the weather was better and the ocean smooth, but two children died and 1 child was born. From May 2nd to the 4th was nice weather and the ship scarcely moved. They saw sea dogs, and I'm not sure what they were, but in the dictionary it says they were mythical beasts like a dog with fins, webbed feet, and scaly tails. Well, maybe. We thought maybe there was a little wine or rum involved. They also saw sea hogs, and this one we believe because that's another name for the porpoises. Some days the weather was calm and other days the winds unfavorable, but the crews were cheerful and happy lads, as were the captain and his officers. By May 10th, the daily ration changed from black bread to hardtack, which was so old and hard they could hardly chew it. On May 13th, a 3rd child died, and on the 14th, a 4th child died. The storm was so bad they thought at any moment the ship would sink. Albert envied those who lived on the land. Storm, then calm, then storm, then calm. One day they saw, I don't know how you pronounce it, but it's H-A-I fish, so maybe a hay fish or high fish, that was nearly as long as the ship. Looked that up, and that's a big shark. That's what that was. On May 19th, they went between great icebergs, going towards Greenland, gliding along in danger of the ship hitting one. The fog was so thick that they could not see 20 steps away. From the 20th to the 24th, they had good winds, but it was terribly cold. Then what a feeling of joy no pen can describe. They saw America. No one was sick now, and everyone shouted and leaped for joy. But on the 25th, instead of the sun rising behind the ship, it rose in front of it, and they could see land no more. They traveled the whole day towards England because the wind was so unfavorable. It seemed the ship was rushing towards the English Channel as though it belonged there. Then on the 26th, land appeared again with high snow-covered mountains. They saw large and small islands. On the 29th, they saw a whale in the distance. It sprayed water as high as the masts of the ship. They must be close to the Gulf. On May 30th, the ship went into the Gulf and up the St. Lawrence River, which was deep and wide. They sailed 2 days to reach the island where the doctor lived, who inspected the ships for contagious diseases. Reaching the island June 2nd, anchors with their immense chains were brought out and lowered. The sailors rowed to the island to get the doctor. While the sailors were gone, the passengers were required to scrub out the ship. And then there was a note, whoever prepared this, said that Grandpa ended This account in the middle of a page, so we know the rest could not have been lost. It is too bad he did not write more. Maybe cleaning out the ship spoiled his urge to write. And then we're a little more history on Albert. This is the gentleman that wrote the story. Albert's parents were William and Margaret, and the rest of his brothers and sisters immigrated to America in 1965, settling in Millhausen, Indiana. Evidently, he had either gone back to Germany and convinced them to come, or he had written letters, but the whole family did come. So he did get to see him again. About 1856, a young lady named Donetta Berger came alone from what is now Germany to Cincinnati, Ohio. She was the youngest child in a family of 21 children. Soon another brother and sister followed. In that family, the father had married a lady, and they had a large family. She died, and he married another lady and had another large family. So some of Donetta's half-brothers and sisters were like 30 and 40 years older than her. So she was the youngest. In 1965, Albert Tomat married Donetta Berger. They lived in Cincinnati, where he worked for Procter & Gamble, making soap and candles. 3 of their children died within a year from smallpox. In 1878, they moved with their remaining children to a farm in Ford County, Kansas. Grandma Donetta was a kind and loving person, always doing things for the children. They could have hard-boiled eggs whenever they wanted them, but they must eat them with salt or bread, and we don't know why this was a requirement, but that was her rule. Our great-grandmother, Elizabeth, was the oldest child of Albert and Donetta. She married Henry Dreyer, and they were our grandmother's parents. I did make a little chart if you need to figure where all they fit in. Henry Dreyer was born in Portage, Wisconsin in 1850 to Frederick and Justina Niemeyer. Justina's parents were tailors of men's clothing in Hanover, Germany. They had 2 sons, Henry and John, and Henry was our ancestor. Henry went to Spearville, Kansas in 1881 and homesteaded there. In 1887, he married Elizabeth Tomat. They owned and operated a general store. In 1890, he sold the store and moved the family to Pueblo, Colorado. He filed claims on mines at Cripple Creek and mined for silver and gold for several years. They lived in Cripple Creek part of the time, and they had a house there, but a lot of the miners lived in tents, so we thought maybe they were kind of lucky to have a house. However, they must not have hit the jackpot, as in 1907 they returned to Spearville, Kansas, and purchased the Planters Hotel, which they operated until his death in 1914. And then his wife and one of our great aunts operated it for several years after that. Henry and Elizabeth Dreyer were parents to 4 children, our grandmother Jessie being the second child. Now on our Grandpa Bestgen side of the family, John's history starts with his mother's family of the Fishers, F-I-S-C-H-E-R-S is how they would spell their name. Our great-great-grandpa was Peter Joseph Fisher, born in 1814 in Prussia, now Germany. His wife, Eva Catherine Knipp, I think that's how you say it, K-N-I-P-P, was born in Germany in 1824. They came to America in the late 1850s and settled in Tipton, Missouri. At this time, the railroad had planned to make Tipton a division point on the railroad, as it seemed to be about halfway between New York and San Francisco. Someone gave a section of land to the railroad if they would in turn move the division point to their land and name it after their daughter, Sedalia. This decision was hard on the town of Tipton, which was counting on expansion. Many people had homesteaded near Tipton, thinking it would be an important town. Peter Joe was a tall and thin man, good-natured and with a good sense of humor. He made shoes out of leather which he had tanned. Grandpa John remembered it was a big day when they would do the butchering and make sausage, and all the people would come. They'd have a party, good food, everything that went with the gathering. Peter liked mechanics and was the first in his area to have a self-tying binder. Some of you probably know what that is. Our grandpa remembered when his grandpa died and the coffin was placed on 2 kitchen chairs and someone held him up to see his grandpa for the last time. Peter and Eva Catherine had 2 boys and 6 girls. Anna, the second oldest, was born in 1857 and would be our Grandpa Bestgen's mother. She spent time helping her father on the farm and wasn't able to get much schooling. So she learned English and German reading and writing from her husband after she got married. And she's the one that married Henry Bestgen. The Bestgen family continues with our grandpa's father, Henry Bestgen. Henry was born in Germany in 1846. His mother died when he was little, and we think maybe he was raised by an aunt, and maybe a little bit spoiled. We're not sure on that. He immigrated to America at age 18 so he could avoid the service. He worked on the railroad and then in a butcher shop and on a farm. When he was courting Anna Margaret Fisher, Anna's mother said he was kind of shabby but very likable. Grandpa Fisher's sometimes rather a gruff old fellow, and being Anna's father, took Henry aside and told him to be honest, to stop the shabby business, and basically clean up his act. Henry listened to Grandpa Fisher, and in the end became a trusted son-in-law and was to become the administrator of Grandpa Fisher's will. Henry Bestgen and Anna Fisher would marry November 16, 1875, in Missouri. Their life together lasted 20 years. Good times and sorrow filled the years. Their oldest daughter, 2 years old, and their second child, a son, 8 months old, both died from whooping cough a couple months apart. August was born in 1880, and he moved from Missouri to Spearville, Kansas to teach school and run a lumber store. He married Dora Deal, and they moved to Sturgis sometime later. One of their sons, Otto, was killed in World War II. Philomene, who is called Wilhelmina in the family Bible, was born in 1881. This will be Larry's side of the family, Larry Bestgen's, or Baker side of the family. She married Charles Baker from, and I'm not sure how you say this, C-E-D-R-I-C-E. Cretus?
Sedgwick.
What is it?
Sedgwick.
Oh, okay. Say it louder.
Sedgwick.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Missouri. This town was destroyed during the Civil War. Charles and Philomene moved to Sturgis as they were advised the climate would be better for Philomene's health, being dry and not so humid as it was in Missouri. One of their sons, Leo, was a German prisoner of war in World War II, and as a result of this, his health was ruined and he died a few years later. Anna Christina was born in 1884. Her first husband died, and she married a Mr. Bateman and had a son, Robert, who was also killed in World War II. Henry Joseph was born in 1886, and he married Hannah Westman and had 2 children. Our Grandpa John was born in 1888 and married our grandmother, Jessie Dreyer. One of their sons, our Uncle Leo, was also killed in World War II. Marie was born in 1890 and married Charles Ravenkamp. Elizabeth was born in 1893 and married Harry Levine. They had 2 children. Frederick Peter was born in 1895. He married a lady named Barbara, and they had 3 children. He became a medical doctor and moved to Sturgis for some time, and then also practiced in Rapid City and Timberlake before he returned to Kansas to take up be a doctor there. The youngest child, Leo, was born in 1897. He was kicked by a horse and died in 1913 at the age of 16. The children were all between the ages of 18 and 8 months when sorrow again came upon them. Henry had a lung illness and was quite sick. Grandpa John, our grandpa, was milking a cow named Red. in the barn, and some of the other children were also helping with the milking. Someone ran into the barn to tell them to come quick as their father was dying. This must have made quite an impression on Grandpa, because he specifically told me that story about, and the cow's name was Red. That must have been his favorite cow. After Henry's funeral, some relatives wanted to adopt some of the children, as they thought the mother could not care for them all. But the priest in the town, Father Kipper, and two true and wise friends of the family, a Mr. Vogel and a Mr. Ketchner, decided that the family should be kept together. The farm had a mortgage to be paid off, so they all worked together. They cut wood, raised gardens, had fruit trees and nut trees. They hunted for rabbits and squirrels, and they fished for frog legs with a red cloth on a hook, and I don't know if that catches frogs or not. Never tried it. Somehow they managed to stay together. They were able to attend the parish school through the 4th grade. After her son Leo died, Anna shared her time with her children. She came to Sturgis with Philomene and Charlie Baker and helped them to get settled in. She also helped the other children as needed. One time, while she was in Tipton, Father Kipper tried to arrange a marriage for her with a polite, well-off gentleman. She said, "What would I want with that old man or any old man?" So she wasn't interested in marrying again. She seemed to always be helping out someone who needed a loving touch, like a mother having a hard or dangerous delivery of a baby, or someone who was sick. On another occasion, a gentleman who had given the family so much grief over a bill at the time of Henry's death was dying of cancer. Her family protested when she made it known that she was going to care for this man, and she stayed with him until he died, saying, "We must forgive. He needs our care more than anyone." And now for a few memories from our generation. Our grandparents, John and Jessie Bestgen, met in Spearville, Kansas. John had gone to telegraph school in Missouri when he was 20 years old, and they met at the Planters Hotel. After several months of keeping company, Jessie's grandpa, Tomat, told John that they had the same ideas and were right for each other. Why not marry? So they did. So basically, looks like he might have asked, or he might have arranged the marriage. They operated the hotel for several years with hard work and long hours. They also had music in their lives. Grandpa played the violin and Jessie played the piano. Others joined in, and soon they had an orchestra in the town. Our mother, Justine, was born in Spearville in September 26, 1914, and Leo was born in 1916. John's brother, August, and his sister, Philomene, were living in Sturgis, so John decided to take the train and move the family to South Dakota. There was a Catholic school here and a convent, and so they thought this would be a good place to raise their family. They rented land and then they farmed. Their daughter Connie Gray, Charlie's side of the family, was born in 1919. We all call her Aunt Pete because when she was little, that's what her dad called her, and we're not sure, but maybe she was a little stubborn. Might that be the case?
You can be sure.
On March 28th, Veronica was born, on March 30th, 1921, Veronica was born. And on October 28th, 1923, if I have this right, Philip was born, right?
I think so, I don't remember.
Take my word for it. It's in the history. On January 14th, 1924, the family was packed up and heading for Omak, Washington by train. Someone had convinced Grandpa that it would be a good idea to go to work and help a Catholic Indian mission there. It turned out to be a disappointing move, and they saved all that they could so they could return home. On November 21st, 1924, after 11 months, John, Jessie, and the 5 children left Washington and headed home, stopping in California to spend some time with Jessie's mother, her sister, and brother who lived there. The older kids loved California and would have loved to have stayed, but after a couple months, they would return to Sturgis. They lived on what is now called the Frank Fry Place. Steve was born July 29, 1927. Pat, or Patricia, was born June 19th, 1930. And Elizabeth, or as most of us know her, Betty, was born January 13th, 1934. In 1930, the family moved to the farm that was to become Home Sweet Home, 7 miles north of Sturgis over Bosch Hill. And Philip still lives on the home place. And Philip is 90. How old are you? 95? Something like that. Lived there a long time. It must have been hard times when income from the farm, eggs, cream, chickens, and produce just barely covered the expenses. In looking through a notebook that Grandma Jessie kept for her bookkeeping, this was hard, especially in the 30s. There might be a difference of plus or minus $6 or $7 either way each month. But there was always a donation to the church, even if it was only 25 or 50 cents. And they always went to church on Sundays, weather permitting. Many times they would walk in from the country. Their faith was important to them. They moved into Sturgis to a house at 1447 Main Street, but the farmer and Grandpa never left him, nor did he ever stop doing his carpenter work. Grandpa continued to have a big garden, fruit trees and vines and flowers. There were always strawberries in his patch and apples and plums and cherries on his trees. And he would bring his little tractor, just a little farm tractor, out to my mother's and help her plow her garden. So I just remember him always being there. That was fun. He was always remodeling or adding on to his house. He helped Grandma with the laundry and the chores, and Grandma was always cooking meals and baking. In this house, they had 2 apartments upstairs, and they kept those in good shape, painting them and cleaning them. And I don't remember who all lived up there except Mrs. Peterson, who lived in the west apartment. And we as kids thought she was either family or a permanent resident. We didn't know. She was always there. Grandpa John wrote every day in a notebook or a calendar one line about the day and what they did. In fact, on November 16th, 1918, 100 years ago today, Grandpa John was gathering corn, not by machine, but by hand. And on November 21st, 100 years ago, it was 15 degrees below zero. November 16th, he helped his brother August gather corn. Oh, this was in 1920. He helped his brother August gather corn. And on December 9th in 1920, he helped Philomene, his sister, and her husband, Charlie Baker, do butchering. On December 29th in 1923, he helped work on Bill Blair's buggy. Try saying that 3 times. There were some cold days, and they just sat by the stove and did nothing because there wasn't anything to do. And on those days, he would write in his book, did nothing. Sat by stove. It's fun to read. Our Grandpa John died in 1979, and Grandma Jessie died 3 months later in 1980. They had a long marriage of 65 years. We are all grateful to them for the sacrifices they made to raise all of our parents. Us 38 grandkids and many, many great-grandchildren are happy and proud to have called them our grandparents. And would anybody like to share stories about this family? Please.
Joan, I think it'd be interesting if you introduced all these different members that are here.
Do you think I can remember?
Well, they can introduce it.
They just need to stand up.
Larry
They can stand up
Larry
and say
Baker,
who they are.
Maureen. Go ahead, she's part of the family.
Charlie.
Pardon?
Charlie was a granddad.
Charlie Baker and Philomene. Philomene was my grandfather's sister, so that's how we're related. And let's see, John back there is married to Maureen, my cousin. Maureen, stand up. And this is their daughter, Naomi.
And my dad.
I'm gonna save the best for last. Because he's gonna talk. In the next row is my brother John. And my nephew's White, and my niece Mika. Let's see, hope I'm not missing anybody. Over here is my daughter Sarah in the back, my husband Dean.
Your daughters?
And my daughter Sarah. The second row is Charlie and Cindy Gray. They're my mother's sister's kids.
Stand up.
Yeah, stand up.
I've got a couple stories to tell too, but the one I'll tell right now is that one of the things I noticed with Grandma and Grandpa, when we were staying there, if we walked in and they were having a conversation and they didn't want us to know what they were talking about, they went to German just like that. And if the conversation was okay, they stayed in English.
So I'll introduce Philip last. He's our last uncle and aunt, or of our aunts and uncles in the family, and he's 95. Would you stand up, Philip, or can you? Would you like to say anything?
Joanne is my goddaughter. I'm her godfather. And I worked and worked and worked, and you're not always successful.
That's a joke. That's a joke.
I have something to tell about my dad. Has to me it's history, and I really think it's important. When he went to telegraphy school. He was born in 1888, and like Joanne said, his dad died when he was really young. So his mother sent him to telegraphy school, and she gave him permission to spend 2 or 3 cents a week, I forget what it was. He loved to read, to buy the Sunday paper. And this one Sunday, this is what he told me, and there's no history or books or anything between us. And that's why I think it's important. He told me he was coming home from church. He stopped to get the paper. In there, the headlines in the paper said, 2 crazy bicycle mechanics from North Carolina put a bunch of junk together, parts of bicycles and other things they found, and they made a gadget that flew, and it flew for about 15 seconds. And this is the important part. If God had wanted us to have wings, wanted us to fly, He would have given us wings. And since that time, my dad saw the men land on the moon. And I think it would really be interesting to find that paper that he said. I've never heard about it before. That's what's interesting to me. That history is direct without any books in between. About Joanne, the nearest I ever came to getting killed, and she was 6 or 7 months old. She was the first grandchild on both sides of the family. And we were down, I think, at my parents' place, and the other grandparents wanted her to come up there, so I put her in the car and stood her right beside me as I was driving. And I drove up to their house and I stepped on the brakes, not very hard, but Joanne went down and hit her head on the dash. And I thought, sure, I was going to get killed before I got out of it. That she had.
Maybe that's what happened to me.
Yeah, probably. There's I guess we can't even get along on our heritage this day and age. My dad told me that his grandparents were born in Alsace-Lorraine. And that's a little country between Germany and France. And we had some French priests here directly from France, and they wanted to know where my parents were from. And I told them that my dad said they were born in Alsace-Lorraine. And he says, well, what period were they there? I said, I don't know for sure, but I think maybe around 1850. And he says, you're not German at all. you're French. Because France on Alsace Lorraine. Maybe we are, I don't know. Joanne mentioned that she's not used to speaking in front of a group of people. Well, I am. Because we have 150 in our family, in our immediate family. So that's quite a crowd to take care of. And they all, it's the best family in all the world. They all love each other, they love me, they're all good, outstanding people, they're the very best. And I can say the same for, except, I can say exactly the same for Justine's kids or Joanna's one of them, they're the very best. They succeed in everything they do, and I think that's really important. So, as she just mentioned, my grandfather died when he was like in his 40s. Probably, if he had lived, he would have seen 4 of his grandsons die in World War II. And I put myself in that same position. And if I had 4 of my grandsons killed in one war, I don't know whether I could take it, but that was what they did. And I guess that's probably about all that I can think of. And Joanne, you did an excellent job of putting that all together. Thank you very much.
Does anybody else have any stories, memories? Charlie, you have a couple
I have
more.
a couple more. When I worked for Steve and Philip for 7 years, and they always used to say to Grandma once in a while, they'd say, "Well, Mom, we just needed to dig 3 foot deeper, didn't we? And you could have been a millionaire." Well, they had the place at Cripple Creek, Colorado, and they were mining it, and they got tired of mining it, and they traded it for a hotel restaurant. And 3 foot deeper in the stope was the richest vein of gold in Cripple Creek. So they always teased Grandma about she could have been a millionairess if they'd have just gone 3 foot deeper. So I think that's part of the Bestgen lineage is don't give up, dig 3 feet.
Good job, Charlie.
Charlie, we're always 3 foot short.
I guess, anybody else?
Well,
Oh, I have a question.
when we were kids, we used to have to go to church during Lent, and oftentimes we would stop at Grandma Bestgen's and eat breakfast almost every day. And we grew up going to the Catholic school through 8 years, and then high school, public school. And we always made our own lunch to take to eat for the noon lunch hour. But our mother would drop them off at Grandma and Grandpa Bestgen's house, and Dave and Charlie or whoever was with us, we would walk there every noon meal. We ate at Grandma and Grandpa's place down there, and it was always just relaxing. She always took good care of us and everything. But
Always
every day for
that
4
Kool-Aid.
years during school, we ate our lunch at that house on Main Street, where I was born.
Yeah.
Well, the house is just below the courthouse if none of you know about that. It's on Main Street, but,
Fifth and Main.
yeah.
So on the 5th of May, that big white house.
It's a
And
great house.
it's still there.
It's, yeah.
But it did grow bigger over all of our life. Like every year or two, there'd be a porch enclosed or another story on that porch or something. It never was a big project, but it just kept gravitating.
The house is still in the family.
I have a question for John, so can I ask John this question? When I first met you and got to know you, you used to write everything on calendars, and
Yeah.
your cattle and your everything, and then you would tuck them away. So do you still do that?
Oh, yeah.
Because see, that's kind of
Only
nice, that
only a
came,
sentence or two.
what?
Only
Yeah,
a sentence or two a day. Sometimes if there was a
Yeah.
bad storm or.
but see, I thought of you when you were talking about your relative Joanne that jotted down something that was your uncle or, you know, that reminded me of John. Remember you were talking about one of your relatives that just wrote it down every day, so John's been doing that
Yeah, but
forever.
it kind of started funny. I didn't do that when I was younger, but when I started renting this place, and my dad and I were, he had some cows there, and he was taking care of mine when I was in college a little bit. And he started stacking a little shit on me about not doing much. So the days I was off college, every weekend, Saturday and Sunday, I would feed the cows, and if I was off Tuesday or Thursday. But I started jotting down what I did on the days I wasn't in college.
Your time
But then I brought that up to my dad like a couple years later, and he says, "Oh, anybody can write anything on the paper." It didn't matter what I wrote down. It was only a few words, but he didn't even, he just passed it off as nothing. But I still do it, I still write a little bit. When we put the cows in different pasture or all in some place. Or sometimes what we sold and how much it brought for a price.
I got one other deal from a personal standpoint. Mike Gorman and I were altar boys, and we volunteered to serve at the convent up there. And somebody thought that was really nice that you did that. You got a religious calling, and we said no. We get bacon every morning because we go to Grandma and Grandpa's after Mass, and sure as heck.
And Grandpa and Grandma always had bacon, and you could put ketchup on the bacon.
Yeah.
So it was like a reward to eat there
Yeah.
for breakfast. Even if you could get 2 strips of bacon and ketchup on a piece of bread.
Yeah.
It was a really good meal.
Yeah.
For breakfast.
Charlie, tell them about the plum jam.
About the way?
Plum jam.
Plum jam. Dave, you and Dave like this.
Oh, you mean the?
How they, your grandma and grandpa never cussed.
Oh, okay.
That's so cute.
Yeah. Uncle Philip told me this, that when Grandma canned plums and stuff, sugar was fairly expensive, so she really, you didn't get a lot of sugar and stuff. Well, he also said that the gray language out at Hereford on the ranch was way more colorful than the Bestgen language out in the country. So anyway, we were all in town, and Grandma used to make these little loaves of bread, and we were all sitting around, and there were plums for dessert. And we all were eating, and Uncle Philip said usually Grandma didn't smile a lot or laugh at stuff, but anyway, it came time to eat the plums, and Dave was like 6 years old, and I was 4. Dave takes a bite of the plums and gets kind of a strange look in his face, and he said, "Boy, these are sour sons of bitches." Yeah. Uncle Philip said, even Grandma lost it.
When we were kids, we moved to town from Stoneville, and then we lived west of here, west of Hershey a little bit, and that road used to go up over the Bosch Hill and Dump Hill now. But Philip lived over north, and his family did too, but that road wasn't very good. It was mostly a dirt trail. And it seemed like every year, maybe a couple times a year, we'd have to get on the 8M4 to go up and pull Uncle Philip out of the ditch and get him back up on the dirt road so he could go to or from town. But it was always fun for us because it would give us an excursion away from the house to drive a little tractor up and pull his 56 Ford car out of the ditch.
Uncle Philip they were the first ones to have TV in the family. And so, was it on Thursday nights we'd get to go to your house once in a while? And we'd all, gather around this little black and white TV and watch the test pattern.
Yeah.
That was on like a half hour. At least 15 minutes before there was any TV.
But that was a step up from listening to the Lone Ranger.
Yeah, and Gunsmoke. Yeah, walking on the boardwalk.
Yeah.
There's probably lots and lots of stories.
Well, the other thing that Mom told me is the only time she saw Grandma and Grandpa get really excited about something was when the smokehouse caught on fire. Because that was their year's supply of meat. So. Yeah.
I guess that must be it.
Yeah, that was great.
and more fun to listen to once you got her started. Which was very good. And Joanne, you know, when you stop and think about it, she's identified all of those pictures. Everyone has something on it, you know. Somewhere down the road, you're all going to get just really happy that you've done all that. So we thank you, Joan, for coming here today and sharing with your family.
Thank you for inviting us.
Okay, thank you for coming. See you in January.